Six. Hello, my name is Bobby Halton, and welcome to today's Fire Engineering Google Hangout, and we're also on Fire Rescue on the Firefighter Nation. So thank you very much for joining with us this afternoon. We're going to have a very important conversation, a very difficult conversation. It's going to make some of you very uncomfortable. Some of you out there may have been victims of sexual assault, and to you victims out there, my heartfelt condolences and my hopes that this conversation today will prevent future victims and will help firefighters and others to understand a little bit about maybe what you went through and how they can help you and help others to avoid what you went through. To those out there listening who may have been abusers, either intentionally or unintentionally, we hope that this will give you some insight into what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. To those of you who may be thinking, this doesn't exist in our profession, or it's so unimportant that it doesn't really matter, nothing could be further from the truth. We'll quote some statistics here that I think will absolutely devastate that impression. Well, I'll just give you a few. Estimates are somewhere between 85 and 70% of all women in the fire service have been at some point sexually assaulted or harassed or sexually harassed or demeaned or excluded due to their gender. You might not think it's true, but it is, and we have to deal with it. So today we're going to have that conversation, and that's not an easy conversation. It's an important conversation. Before we begin, there's a tremendous resource you need to know about. Go to iWomen's website. The lead item on their website today will show you a wonderful video. Ernie Mitchell and our IFC president, President Metcalf, do a great job of explaining the problem. Then there's a PDF that I recommend every firefighter, whether you're chief of department or you were hired yesterday, download. Read it. It's about 30 pages. Might take you a half hour, might take you an hour, but it'll be an hour that you couldn't invest more fruitfully in your future and the future of your organization. We've got a lot of issues to deal with in the fire service today, but one of those issues we shouldn't have to deal with is bullying and harassment from one another. We have to stop it. We have to stop sexual assault. Joining me in the conversation today are three of my very good friends, three people who have impeccable credentials, who've had incredible careers, and who've dedicated themselves to helping firefighters and to helping people in general. With me today will be psychologist Beth Murphy, who will also be doing a webinar for us later in the week about mental health. So she's well versed in how these things happen to people and how these kinds of attitudes evolve and how they permeate our cultures, along with her husband, John Murphy, who, aside from being a decorated fire officer, is also a well-known and distinguished lawyer. So he'll be adding a little bit of insight as to some of the legal ramifications and things we need to know. And my dear friend, Angela Hughes, who's an officer in the city of Baltimore and a decorated officer, captain now, serving in the city of Baltimore, and the next president of iWomen. But more importantly than that, she's a firefighter. She's a woman who's gone through some of the things we're going to talk about today and can speak eloquently to them. And she's incredibly talented and gifted and a tremendous blessing to fire engineering and fire rescue, as well as the iWomen. And we'll be teaching this year at FDIC. So if you're attending, you'll have a chance to sit down with her. So if you have some questions after this and you need to bounce them off a fellow firefighter who can really give you great insight and direction, please reach out to Angela while she's there. Angela, John, Beth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'd kind of like to begin with the panel by talking about what exactly is sexual assault? What is sexual harassment? And whoever wants to take it first.
I think from the legal perspective, Bobby, and based on
I just want to say thank you for doing this. I think this is a really brave, sort of cutting-edge discussion that we haven't done enough in our institution, and it's been too long in coming. And I think that iWomen's and other institutions are, protecting women firefighters are doing a great job in bringing the problem forward. And it's up to us as, administrators and fire chiefs, firefighters, fire officers, to ensure that we don't have our women firefighters suffer the indignities of what we're going to be talking about today. So I applaud fire engineering for bringing this forward. And just to kind of define harassment is basically is a course of conduct directed at a specific person that causes substantial emotional distress in such a person and serves no legitimate purpose. And then, kind of tied in with that is, what sexual harassment is, and it's that type of harassment based on gender. And so I think, as Angie talked about a little bit earlier, is that it doesn't only happen to women; it also happens to men as well. But we don't hear about it as much as we do women. But if you look at the statistics that go on in the military, as an example, there's just too many sexual assaults of males and of females as well. Certainly the number of women who are assaulted in the military are a lot higher than men. But it's appears to be a pervasive sort of a problem for that group of people, and certainly and unfortunately I think the fire service is not immune to those assaults, both in physical assault like rape, battery, harassment in the workplace, as you talked about, Bobby, is that based on your gender, you're excluded from many activities that go on because of your gender. And I think that the society today needs to adopt a philosophy that is not so much based in the law, because the law is all over the place. I think there's a sufficient amount of cases and case law and Supreme Court decisions and local court decisions that protect women, but from the time of the assault to the time they go to court is years. A lot of emotion, lots of money, job loss, and the things that I believe that we don't have to endure in our service.
Very good. Ange, do you want to add to that at all, or?
Absolutely. As John mentioned, it's not a woman's problem in the fire service. It's the entire fire service needs to come together and speak out about this and make it a no-tolerance issue. It's definitely not just a gender. It's gender, race, sexual orientation, so many different things that people experience. And I think as a fire service, we need to make it an ongoing issue and continue with training to educate people. Our goals at iWomen are to provide the resources, just as the military has partnered with RAIN. We want to partner with RAIN and provide resources to help people for their own well-being and reporting and reduce the stigma of reporting harassment and assault.
What is RAIN, Angela? Could you describe that as an acronym, please?
Yes. It's actually the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and they have partnered with the DoD in starting resources for people of the military who have been assaulted or harassed. So it's a great resource, and they have allowed us to utilize some of their website as resources to assist people in reporting and being healthier if they do endure this crime.
Well, I'd like to bring Beth in for a second, and we were talking a bit before we went on camera about, I believe this, I think that the fire service has enjoyed an exalted position within society, in the American society, for the last 250 years, albeit well-deserved for the selfless service that we provide, as well as law enforcement and our medical brothers and sisters. That being so, I think that we're held to a higher standard, and I find that absolutely acceptable. Matter of fact, I think that the standard should be higher still, and I believe that we should live up to that standard. And I think that any conduct that we participate in, and no, we're going to do it. People are going to make mistakes. We're human. We're flawed. But we should always be striving for perfection, not just in what we do, but in who we are, because we are held to we are held in a higher light, if you will. We are given privileges because of that, and we're also given certain responsibilities. So I think we need, if Beth, if you could help me out to kind of discuss briefly what are some of the types of behaviors, activities that people engage in that are harassing, that are demeaning, that are considered illegal, and beyond that, that are really just immoral from a firefighter's perspective. Because I think a lot of people think that jokes and horseplay and harassment, that the firefighter harassment that goes on is okay because we've always done it. It's not okay. And could you elaborate on those kinds of behaviors?
Yeah, so you mentioned, like in your question, you mentioned the types of behaviors that go on that are illegal. So that's one of the problems, is that a lot of the behaviors that actually fall within a continuum of sexual harassment are not going to be found to be illegal. They're not going to be punishable through legal means. And so that's one of the things that if we're going to make these changes, we need to do a lot of education around what are those behaviors. And these behaviors, as I said, they are on a continuum. So it's, on one hand, or at one end of the continuum, you have the off-color joke. At the other end of the spectrum, you have sexual assault and rape. And so we, from the legal perspective, and what usually gets the most attention are the things that end up in court, the things that somebody could be charged with. But the things that do the greatest harm are the daily insults, the daily things, the constant jokes, the exposure to dirty magazines in the firehouse, the witnessing of a fire officer making comments of a sexual nature about a citizen, a woman, and being a woman and listening to that. It's this daily deluge of things that in and of itself maybe we can excuse, but constantly being barraged with that, it makes it difficult. And those types of things are the things that don't always get punished. And that's part of the culture of the fire service and even of other industries. There's that culture too, like military and construction and police. And so anytime you have a predominantly male environment, there's a way of being and a way that they bond, and it doesn't always work well when you put women in among the mix. Or anybody that stands out. So it's a cultural shift, and it's looking at sexual harassment as a continuum. So it can be seemingly innocent on one end and difficult to punish, and even difficult to recognize that is harassment, to the overt sexual assault. So we have to look at it as a continuum and then educate on that.
Well, you mentioned an interesting comment, and while I was researching for this conversation today, I saw that referenced several times where they talk about the male culture, and I think part of what that's let me just say directly, I think that's lowbrow male culture. I think that's the lowest common denominator of male culture. Having been involved in male culture my entire life, I can tell you that the times when that type of discussion or that type of behavior came up, it was someplace that I didn't want to be, and the majority of the other gentlemen who were exposed to it also didn't want to be there. The people who are participating in that do not represent the gentlemen and the men of character that I've been honored to associate myself with my entire career, and I think represent a small faction, albeit well publicized faction by the media, and because we always, and Ange can chime in with me here too, I think we tend to, you always hear about the news is not full of the good deeds that went on all over town today. It's full of the bad that went on all over town today. And as officers in the fire service, we always joke about the fact that you deal with the 10%, rather than the 90% who are wonderful, great people. And I think that the 10% of men who, let me just put it into context I think people will relate to, Charlie Sheen type humor, are lowbrow people, and I don't think that. I think that just on behalf of the men that I've been honored to serve with, don't find him at all amusing.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you on that. John and I talk a lot about this subject, and it's unfortunate that it is the few that really reflect poorly on this larger wonderful service, and it does make people uncomfortable. I mean, you don't have to be on the direct receiving end of it. It affects everybody, and so even men and women that are witnessing this are affected by it. And so part of the problem is getting more witnesses to it standing up and saying this is not right. I've talked to a lot of women, and you hadn't mentioned it, but I also am a retired firefighter, and so I worked for a really progressive department, and so I witnessed some behaviors that I just couldn't believe were allowed to go on. And that's why I say there's this continuum, because some of the stuff that I witnessed and experienced was of that low end of the spectrum, the jokes, and not even the dirty magazines. I had an officer that made me change my mind about Victoria's Secret catalogs. It's like this great catalog for women for lingerie, but depending on how it's used, it can be highly sexualized, and it was something that I had witnessed that made me uncomfortable. And I'm sure that it made the men that I worked with uncomfortable as well, but nobody said anything. And so that's kind of the environment that we really want to change through this dialogue and future dialogues and training, is to bring this out in the light, to talk about it, and to have people who witness it feel free to say, hey, this is not acceptable. I mean, this isn't just affecting her as the target or him as the target. This is affecting me as well as the witness.
That's really, and I'd like to bring Ange in real quick, because I think you really hit on some key things. It's really a form of bullying, of power. It's really not about sex, and I have to agree with you. I'm just about 60 years old, and when I go through the mall and I walk past that Victoria place and places like it, it's embarrassing. I mean, it makes me uncomfortable. That really explicit stuff like that, especially if I'm with my wife or my daughter-in-law. It's kind of odd that we've kind of normalized some of that stuff in society today. But that aside, you raised some really great stuff, Beth, and I'll ask Ange to kind of join in with us here. When I see the number 85 to 70%, somewhere in that range of women in the fire service have been harassed, have been assaulted by this kind of behavior. And I was a fire chief, and I was an operations chief, and I was a union officer. But oddly enough, I never handled a single complaint, although I know it went on in my organization. Not one ever got to me. Why why is it so underreported, and what are some of the barriers to getting people to come forward and say, hey, I saw, whether it was a witness or the actual victim, hey, I saw this or I heard this, and it's wrong. What are why is it so underreported?
Well, I will say to start, I know at least in my department, I'm in a major metro department in Baltimore County. We have over 1,000 members, and like you, I work with some really great people, and we all have dignity, and we're a culture of dignity, but human factors play into it as well, and a lot of it is education, and just understanding what is wrong and what is right. A lack of training, I think, is a big deal, and as Chief Metcalf and Chief Mitchell said, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept in our video, in our PSA. And all too often, people don't even realize sometimes what they're doing or saying is wrong when it comes to something as comments. But if we continue to educate people, I think it'll get better. And as for the reporting, I can tell you it's the stigma that is associated with it. People are terrified to be, and I've heard this on a number of occasions, I don't want to be that girl. I don't want to, I fear the retaliation. I don't want to have people talking about me. I just want to leave and get away from it. And it's unfortunate. And I think iWomen's Eyes were really open to it when we started getting a lot of messages on our Facebook and emails about this subject and how scared people were. And they just wanted help. They wanted resources. They wanted links to go to. And it was hard for us as trustees because the laws vary from state to state, but we tried to help them. We're not social workers, but we tried to give them the resources. So many people just want to be better. But I think the first thing is the education of what's the difference between right and wrong, because that's a big part.
And I know several times you said that it can happen to men too, but I'm just going to say it to my fellow men out there. We dominate the fire service. We dominate in numbers the fire service. So, we represent probably the 85. I don't think women are 15% yet. I don't know what the exact numbers are. Ange, you might know. But
it hovers under 4% still.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like 3.7, 3.4. They're different numbers, but under 4%.
Yeah. So we are the abusers in 95% of the cases if everybody was involved. I mean, if all of us were involved, we're 95% of it. So we need to do more to protect the female firefighters and one another from this type of behavior. And I think Ange said some great stuff. We all want to belong. We want to be part of the team. We don't want to rock the boat. And I think also times, and I read this often in the literature, and I read several case studies about sexual assault and abuse, the abusers tend to be pretty popular characters sometimes because they are bullies. I wrote an editorial this month about bullies, and I think this is a form of bullying, if you will, because that's how they make themselves feel better about themselves or whatever, or they think that women don't belong in the fire service, which couldn't be further from the truth. But so I think there's a lot of barriers to the reporting. As we go forward, John, before we get into how to create systems where people can come forward more readily and where people can, and we were talk a lot more about training before we wrap up today. But John, there's a couple of three major categories that I saw as we looked at this issue of sexual harassment and harassment in general in the fire service, and one was quid pro quo, the other one was called hostile environment. And the other one which I saw, which I thought was very interesting, was the non-sexual sexual harassment, which I thought was fascinating. Could you speak to those three categories, quid pro quo, hostile environment, and non-sexual harassment, just so everybody has an understanding of what we're talking about? And then we'll kind of dovetail into a little bit about reporting and how to encourage reporting and do good reporting and good investigations and training.
Sure.
Just kind of define it for us a little more.
Very quickly, the quid pro quo component is it's kind of simply explained, it's this for that. So if you expect to get promoted or advance in our profession, then you're going to have sex with me or whoever the supervising officer is, in order that is kind of instrumental in the type of career pathway that you're going to have. And so having a sexual relationship or having any other sort of physical or intimate contact would make me want to promote you in my organization. So quid pro quo is basically this for that. Sexual harassment, or that sort of intensive harassing environment that has sexual overtones or connotations, is essentially the issues that Beth talked about. The magazines, sometimes I hate to say this, but some of the male firefighters will be walking around after taking a shower with just a towel on, and thinking that sort of behavior is okay, but it's designed to intimidate women into placing where their place is in a particular organization, and it's not here. And so what they do is they create this sort of sexualized environment that kind of makes it feel uncomfortable specifically for the women, but I think as we all talked about it, makes it very uncomfortable for everybody. There was an interesting article, I think, that came out a couple days ago about some attorney wrote this in the Midwest about the sexualization of a particular department based on this sort of impression that women are not treated well, they're objects of unwarranted attention, and that they basically bring this on themselves because they've entered this sort of man's world, which we all know isn't true. I mean, unfortunately, less than 4% of firefighters are women, but those are important 4%, I think, in our profession, and we're going to see more and more and more as we go along. And then I think the last part is just not, I have a short memory loss, or short-term memory, Bobby, but the third component
was the non-sexual harassment.
Yeah, the non-sexual harassment. So that's that sort of not being included in baseball games. So a lot of fire departments will have a sports team like softball or baseball. Not getting invited to a picnic, not hanging out with the guys at a bar, not just exclusiveness. I think is that sort of environment that women are generally not accepted into the sort of boys club environment that that creates that sort of non-sexual harassing environment. And I think Angie touched on this a little bit, is about the reporting mechanism, and that she and her group have had a number of women that have called asking for resources. Where can I go? Who can I talk to? Basically, what can I do in my department? Because they may be the only woman in the department, or there may be two women in the department, and so they don't want to be they want to stand out as good firefighters, but they don't want to stand out as the person that reports a rape charge or files a sexual harassment charge, because there's this sort of need, and Beth could probably talk about this more than I, to fit into an organization, and they'll do whatever it takes, whatever is necessary in order to fit in. Now, one of the things we have to remember is assault and rape are crimes, and so if a firefighter is raped by another firefighter, man or woman, doesn't make any difference, but more often we see women that are raped by male firefighters don't report it because of the stigma, I think, of that sort of physical assault. They don't want to be the reporting person. They go home, or they go wherever they're going to go, and they basically they clean up the evidence of the sexual assault. And so when they finally go to file a complaint with the local police department, it gets into a he said, she said sort of environment. And if there's no evidence, then the police aren't going to be quick to do an investigation. And I know we're going to talk about this at the end, but I think that there's a huge gap in our training and policy and supervision and those sorts of things that I know we're going to talk about at the end. But it's important for women and for men to protect each other. I mean, that's the whole genesis of what our profession is all about, is we're protecting, we've got our backs, and we also protect the public. And we also, and I hate to say this too, but I'm gonna, we see sexual assault going outside of our profession and transporting young women in the back of our ambulances. Having a badge makes you like a Superman, and so you're more likely to engage in some sort of sexual behavior at a bar. And I think the example that you brought forth, Bobby, of the National Fire Academy incident is it's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think we as men in the fire service seem to have this sort of permission, to do these sorts of things. And I can tell you right now, from a fire chief's perspective, as a father of 5 daughters, and as a lawyer, this is behavior that has got to stop, and it's got to stop now.
We were before we went on camera. John's referring to an incident that I was informed of over the weekend, where a firefighter got drunk off duty at the National Fire Academy and put his hands on another firefighter, a female firefighter. And it was interesting, Ange, and maybe you could comment on it. I don't know the specifics of the case. I just know the general story. But I know the story to be true. Got it from a great source. The gentleman who did it, or probably not a gentleman, probably not the right word, but the individual who did it was drunk. Claims he didn't recall the incident. Claimed it never happened before. Was witnessed, so we know he did do it. The victim didn't want to pursue the matter. The academy did. They escorted him off campus and sent him back to his department and notified his department. But the individual involved, who was a firefighter and a police officer, a licensed police officer, didn't want to pursue the matter, which I thought was interesting. Does it? I guess Ange or Beth, whether you're on duty or off duty, if it relates to the job, whether it's quid pro quo or hostile environment or non-sexual assault, it still can be tied back to the job, right? I mean, we can if a firefighter came to me and she told me, hey, this guy did this to me, he's one of our firefighters at the bar, and he did it to her because she's a member of our organization, can I take action against that individual as the fire chief or as a disciplinarian in the department?
Well, I'll speak on that incident itself, because I did talk to Dr. O'Neill about that, and I think a lot of times it's very painful, and Beth can probably attest to this better than myself, but it's very painful to relive that, and that's probably why the person didn't want to report it. I'm not going to speak for them, but I will commend the National Fire Academy and Dr. O'Neill, because they definitely made it a no-tolerance issue, immediately removed the person from the campus, did all the steps in the right direction of notifying the department and making sure that, their fire chief was aware of the incident as well. And it's not something that is going to be acceptable at the National Fire Academy, and I know it's something that Dr. O'Neill is very passionate about, training and educational in that as well. But as for the person who was assaulted, why she didn't want to report it, if I had to guess, I would say it's very critical for us, the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah. So a lot of times women, so there are a lot of reasons why women wouldn't report, and I think that in the fire service, one of the biggest reasons is that this is your family, and as a woman you had to work hard to get in there, and you have to work hard to stay there and to prove your worth, to prove your strength. And when you are assaulted by a brother, a member of your family, then you have to figure out, well, do I want, and you said this earlier, Angie, about, do I want to be labeled as that girl, that woman? Because that's what does happen, is that when you report some type of sexual assault, then you now you take on a whole different definition of who you are, and in the fire service, it can ruin your career, because now you're isolated. Now you are untouchable. You're that woman that you have to stop talking when she comes in the room, and then there's the like this is the family, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. So there's kind of some shame around it. It's power. So you work hard to show your strength. So if you report this, then now you're helpless. you don't have strength, and you worked hard to prove that. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in your head. And so you probably have heard of cognitive dissonance. So you are a strong woman firefighter, and you are part of a family. Now, somebody in your family just assaulted you, and if you retreat and report, then you're not strong, and you've just gotten a member of your family in trouble. And will it be believed or not? Because a lot of times it comes down to, and it was good that this was witnessed so that action could be taken, but a lot of times this stuff happens without witnesses, so then it is a he said, she said situation, and women don't expect to be believed. And so with all that going into it, then they have to figure out, well, how do I go on from this? And so then they start telling themselves things like, well, I must have done something. I'm responsible. I mean, I was drinking too, or I was in the wrong place, or I wore a suggested outfit, or I said the wrong thing, or something like that. So they start taking some responsibility for it as well to deal with that cognitive dissonance that comes up, that uncomfortableness. And so they start taking some sense of responsibility for the action, because that also helps them take back some of their power. And that's not, I mean, it's good and bad, because it doesn't actually get at the real root of the problem, and it's a temporary fix for the individual for regaining their power. And I think there was one other point which I just seem to have lost, but
well,
I'm sure to come back.
A quick question to you and Ange. It begs the question, how can we make it more comfortable or less threatening for our female firefighters to come forward and report it? I mean, what could we do within the systems to make it easier or less threatening? I guess that's the best word, less threatening to come forward and say, this happened to me and I find it either threatening or hostile or inappropriate.
Well, I can say that I think if there's trust there, when there's trust is there, it's going to work. If we don't trust our department, trust our chiefs, trust our first line supervisors, it's not going to happen. So if we trust each other to do the right thing, then I do believe that people will start to step up and report it.
Yeah, and I agree. It does. There has to be trust. But having conversations like this, and women knowing that, that we're basically bringing it out into the open. We're taking a topic that usually gets it's discussed quietly in whispers, if at all. In private with therapists maybe. But having these discussions and doing training and encouraging everybody, whether you're the target or you are the witness, to come forward. And when somebody that has been assaulted doesn't feel like they have a voice to bring it forward themselves, having witnesses that are willing to bring it forward and stand up and do the right thing, and to have that zero tolerance. I know, Bobby, you asked earlier, and this kind of goes a little bit out of my realm and is more like within the chief realm, but you talked about for that off-duty behavior, what can you do as a chief? And I would say, well, you extend that departmental zero tolerance to off-duty behavior as well. Now, I know, because this is a conversation John and I have had, is that a lot of times that goes back to your SOPs or your SOGs, and it's about what you write in there. And I know in my department we had a off-duty performance clause, because it was expected that even when we were off-duty, we were representing our department. And so it was a performance unbecoming. And so if we did something off duty, we could be disciplined by the chief. And And I know that if you don't have something like that written, that it creates all sorts of legal issues, which John could talk about.
Right, like conduct unbecoming, like getting a
Yes.
DWI, we should put it in
Yeah.
that same kind of category. And
Yes.
I couldn't agree more. I'll just, and I know my wife wouldn't mind me saying this because I think it's important to the conversation. My wife was assaulted in college. There over I won't tell you over how many years ago. well over a couple of generations ago, to put it that way. And it left a everlasting. It was an extremely difficult time for her in the immediate afterwards. And then, luckily, the assailant was interrupted. Some people walking by saw this individual trying to assault her and intervened. Fortunately, but tremendously impactful event in my wife's life. And so I've always been my radar's always been kind of up about the issue, but I think that this conversation is so important because Beth and Ange and John, everyone said it. We're not talking about it as if it doesn't exist, as if it's not relevant, and it's absolutely relevant, and we need to talk about it, and we need good policies and procedures. And again, if you're listening, I'm not going to read the policies and procedures that are available on the iWomen's website. Please download that PDF. There's several model procedures, and none of them are perfect, but the one that I certainly found to be the most inclusive and the most one I like the best was the Forest Services. Obviously, for me, the Forest Services just resonated with me. But that being said, you need good policies and procedures, and we don't have time here in this conversation to go over what needs to be in them, but they talk about formal and informal reporting. And what I was going to ask Ange and Beth and John if they thought that this was a good idea, how we have our near-miss reporting system where it's kind of a non-punitive, almost anonymous deal. In the airlines, it is anonymous. You go in and airline pilots can write up something so that people learn from it. You'd think that something like that would help at all. I know it doesn't help the immediate situation in that org, but at least so that there'd be a growing awareness of the pervasiveness of some of this activity within our industry and law enforcement and the EMS as well. It's not just firefighters that need to be more aware of this activity. It's all of us. Do you think something like that would be of value?
Absolutely. I think that what you mentioned, informal and formal reporting policies, are really important. I think every department needs to adapt them, whether or not they have women. There's a lot of departments that don't even have women. Be prepared, be proactive, not reactive, and I think you'll find great success in that.
Well, I think as a chief officer, and I'm like you, Bobby. I've never had an event in our organization, quite of the magnitude that we have been talking about. But we've had women, again in my organization, that we built fire stations with individual rooms and individual bathrooms. And one of the biggest complaints is that the men will use the woman's bathroom and leave it all trashed up and then make them clean it up when they got there. And that, quite frankly, is a form of harassment. I mean, it's those subtle things that we're seeing in our organization to make women firefighters or people that are different than the men firefighters and they're not feel welcome, and they try to get rid of them. I think there needs to be a safe place for women to report. And if the culture of the organization is not conducive to that sort of safe haven or safe place, then people who are assaulted don't really have a safe place to go, and so they can't talk to their families. Husbands or wives. There's an expectation that when you come home from work as a firefighter, you talk a little bit about what went on, but generally, unless you have an open dialogue with your partner, your spouse, you really don't talk about what's going on, all of the awful things that you may see, and some of the conduct unbecoming that we talked about earlier. There's really not an avenue for people to go to talk. So if you do have a safe haven or an 800 number that you can call and make just have somebody to talk to or file a complaint or whatever, it pretty soon becomes not an anonymous call anymore, especially if you have the police showing up at your front door at the fire chief's office and saying, firefighter A assaulted firefighter B, and we need to talk to both of them. And in our service, things get around the firehouse pretty fast, and it's and all of a sudden it becomes stigmatizing. And I think this is wrong for our industry to sort of take that approach, and a lot of it has to do with the culture of our organization. And then things we're going to talk about is how do you change that culture? How do you make it more accepting for women firefighters to come in, or people of color, or minorities, or people that don't look like me coming into my organization, and create that sort of safe place that I can come in, I can do a very good job, I can make a difference in my community. I earn a good living and a wage to support my family, and then every day I can go home safely. And safely doesn't mean, in the absence of having a beam fall on my head, but being safe from harassment, all of the conduct unbecoming that we're talking about today. And I'm sure that there's, of all the women that are in the fire service and other institutions and industry as well, have similar stories. And so somehow, in our little microcosm of the world, we need to change the culture of how we deal with people who don't look like me, and who aren't the sort of the 97% of America's fire service are males. And so how do we change that? And we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and if I can add one other thing, I think in reporting, and John, I'm interested in, and Bobby, your thoughts on this. We're always talking about following the chain of command in the fire service. So isn't it important for us to have resources where we don't necessarily have to follow the chain of command? If we could have a peer representative that we could go to and feel more comfortable with in reporting these kind of things, because I'm sure every fire chief is going to want this to stay, or it goes or a formal complaint. So, because sometimes the offenders are your first line supervisors or the chief that you don't want to investigate because he's buddies with the captain or the lieutenant involved. So what are your thoughts on that? Don't you think there should be ways for us to reach out to our peers and have a non-formal way that we don't necessarily need to follow the chain of command in these instances?
I'll just answer very briefly. I think there needs to be a way to bypass the chain of command in these events. I know that there is in policy, and probably the policies that iWomen's have, and certainly I know in our organizations and Beth organization, and probably when Bobby was the chief, there's a way to get over the offender, and it could be your lieutenant or your captain or your chief. That you need a way to get out the word to request some assistance. I think having a peer counselor, I know when Beth and I talk about CISM and having some peer counselors, in there, it's like you don't want to have some of these people as peer counselors because, it's like, would you want to talk to that person? And so I think you need to make sure that whoever your peer counselor is or your outside resource is, that they're qualified to listen and to offer some assistance to the reporting party, and also have a mechanism to get back into the organization to make those changes to prevent that sort of behavior. And one of the big issues is the confidentiality issue. And so when you talk about doing investigations, we as an investigator, I tried to maintain the individual's confidentiality, but the reality is it's impossible. And so I think those people need to understand, the people that are getting investigated or the people that filed a charge or a claim, is that although you try to get the confidential arena or environment, it's difficult because you're going to be talking to different people, or you're going to be calling an outside investigator in, or you're going to have the police showing up at your door, and then all pretext of confidentiality goes out the window. But I think it's a good idea to talk. Have somebody that you can talk to, somebody you can consult with. It could be an outside, counselor who's used to dealing with sexual trauma, or in a harassing environment before you get to litigation. I think there's a lot of things that we need to do in our industry to kind of create that safe haven.
Well, and it's just, Ange, I think that we need to have formal and informal ways for firefighters who feel they've been harassed or assaulted, whether male or female, to notify the administration within the organization. I think within the municipality or county, there should also be a mechanism. But I think my idea about the near miss idea, and I don't know if iWomen could host this, or Fire Engineering, certainly if iWomen thinks it's a good idea, we'll be happy to provide a link or assist you in any way we can, and Fire Rescue. I can speak for both. I know that any of the publications I work for or with would be happy to help you do this. I guess the near miss idea I had there was that would give us an opportunity to do a reporting, and it could be anonymously, I don't really care, but then let that organization know that someone within your organization is suffering this or has suffered this, or you have an abuser in your midst, and maybe we don't give them a name or but just raise that awareness level. I think that those three, clearly a formal procedure needs to be laid out in everyone's policies and procedures, as well as an informal procedure, so that if you're not comfortable with going to your officer or going to the union representative, or maybe you're not even comfortable with the EEOC, maybe perhaps there's an outside agency or a local counseling service or a local women's group, or you know, I don't care what it is, some kind of outside group should be allowed to bring the complaint forward, or take that confidential statement, formally or informally. I totally agree with you there, but I think I'd really like to consider with the iWomen, I'd love to have a conversation with you all about whether we should create a database, a near miss reporting type system, where we could let organizations know. I would have been very grateful if, as the chief, someone had come forward to me and said, Chief, we've gotten a report that there's an abuser or someone being abused or harmed in your organization, but they don't want to come forward because they are aware of the potential retaliation. And I'm not that tough a guy either. I've backed down to bullies in the past because I was afraid of the ramifications of standing up to them. We all have. You know, none of us are that tough. We'd like to pretend we are, but I'll be the first to say that I'm not proud of everything I've done because I was afraid to speak up and challenge the status quo or the big man on the campus, so to speak. So, yeah, no, I'd fully support it. One of the things I'd like to touch on while we still have some time, and I really appreciate it, I'd love to follow up this conversation with the feedback we get. If the three of you are willing to do so, I'd love to schedule a follow-up conversation on this in the next month or two. Maybe in November or December we can go back on and talk about the feedback we got and any new information we've got on the topic. But Ange, if you could talk a little bit about training and the kinds of training that we really need, and who should be involved, and who can we reach out to, and you know, I went through some god-awful diversity training during my career, and perhaps you could give us some better alternatives for sexual harassment and diversity in general, and some ideas on that.
Sure. Well, there's lots of great avenues out there. I'm a firm believer in people are going to listen to your own department heads. So I think if you take the well-respected people in your own department and provide them with the resources to with help from people like John and Beth, the legal, the psychological thoughts. iWomen is hoping, and we're working together with a human factor scientist on getting some more validated data on this and some good ways to train. And I am very grateful that you have invited me and accepted me to FDIC to share my thoughts and iWomen's thoughts on just a basic program. But I really think it's important to get your own people to buy into it first. The company officers, as we've all heard, are the ones that are really making the decisions and sitting around the firehouse at the table, and they're the ones that are going to lead this cultural change. So I think you need to get your own people to buy into it and have good data with educated sources such as John and Beth to help you with that, and I think together we can definitely make strides to make a positive change.
I
just sold you out, John.
Thank you. I'd like to add that, you know, the one thing about training, because I remember going through diversity training when I first got in the department, and it was just it didn't happen enough. And so the thing is that this needs to be a continual topic of discussion, and there needs to be ongoing training. But the worst time to have training in your department is after there's been an event. Because if you want to make the person regret reporting, and to have them stand out and be, potential focus of, bad feelings of everybody that now has to undergo this training, then do the training right after the event. So the training needs to be, and I think, Angie, you mentioned this earlier, it needs to be proactive. Training cannot be reactive. So it needs to happen, and you need to select times that it's going to happen and have it happen on a regular basis, and don't do it following an event, because that will further stigmatize the individual, and then it becomes, training because so-and-so raised a stink about something. And so that you want to avoid.
Yeah, Ange will be at FDIC, and if you're listening, we welcome anyone who's credentialed and prepared to speak on the topic to please submit for 2016, because the topic's not going to go away. We're not going to let it go away. We've committed ourselves to fighting cancer. We've committed ourselves to fighting harassment. We've committed ourselves to mental health. This is all part of mental health. There's no way someone can feel healthy and secure in their employment if they're worried about being ostracized or harassed or assaulted due to their gender or their sexual orientation or anything else. It's just not acceptable at any level. I think this is such a critical topic, and it touches home, as I said, to me on a personal level. My wife's story notwithstanding, I regret the times when I could have done better for the folks that I was serving as their chief officer, but now serving as the person responsible for FDIC, I want to do better every year. So I would please, if you have articles you'd like to run, if you've got ideas you'd like to get out there, please let me know, and we'll get them published either online or in one of the magazines that Penwell Corporation allows me to participate in. And I'll get you in touch with Ange and Beth and John and help you to move forward and educate others, because that's what our purpose is here. But before we go away, and I know I asked my friends to give me an hour. I'm going to try to squeeze a few more minutes out of them if they'll let me. Just some closing thoughts, and are you willing to come back on maybe in a month or so and see what kind of feedback we get, and maybe go a little deeper into the conversation?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, John, for sure. Just a couple final thoughts, because I think Angie's got some pretty awesome final thoughts here. I think that one of the things we talked about, if I could just recap what we talked about, you have to have a policy in your organization talking about harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, bullying, all of those sort of things that are covered under either state law or federal law. And I think that the instructor that comes in has to be well versed in fire department culture, because all of us have probably sat in these horrible discrimination lectures that have been dry, are not interesting. They may be after the fact, like Dr. Beth talked about. And so we need to have that sort of education on a continual basis, so we understand how we affect other people. So it's got to be a policy that's enforced, that's well written, and I think iWomen's have a great policy bank that they can, that you can go into and custom design a policy for your organization, which includes off-duty conduct. And so we have many times that we have firefighters that conduct themselves unreasonably off-duty, and as an organization, it's hard to enforce or discipline somebody if there's no policy in place. I think part of the education also takes a look at our culture, and so to try to create a safe place for women firefighter or minorities in our fire service, that if there's an issue going on, they have a place to go, and that they have a place to talk about it and see how we can correct that sort of behavior amongst the perpetrators and also the leadership in our organization. And sometimes, leaders have a lot to do. And sexual harassment or those sorts of things is not high on their radar screen until they get, served with a complaint and the summons for one of their firefighters saying, this is a sexual harassment claim, and we're seeing more and more of those claims coming forward with high payouts, causing, a lot of financial distress for an organization. But nobody, there's no amount of money that can change, what has happened to that firefighter or the organization. There's always that, sort of after effect that goes on. I think supervision, we have a tendency not to supervise well. Our supervisors may be involved in harassing behavior. And I think that everybody is a supervisor in an organization. We try to create a culture of safety where everybody can be the safety officer. We have everybody in the fire service is a lawyer. We have, hundreds and thousands of fire service lawyers in there and some counselors. But I think as a supervisor, everybody needs to be a supervisor. So if you see bad behavior occurring, you need to stop it right away. Talk to the person and say, this is not the conduct that I want in my fire department, and you need to stop that right now. I think we've already talked a lot about reporting and creating a safe haven for reporting. I think Bobby's got a great idea of doing maybe a 1-800 number or some sort of a national collection point that there can be a referral source on a regional basis, and I think that's going to be good. And then, unfortunately, if you're going to do an investigation and these sorts of things in your organization, we want to consider hiring an outside investigator that it's neutral. It has no vested interest in your organization, has no vested interest in the outcome other than it's righteous and just. And it's going to take a lot of work. And it's not that we're not doing it. I think we're doing it in many arenas. And it's not to create this sort of, the fire service is a horrible place to go for women and people of color and minorities. It's a great place to be. It's the exception that Bobby talked about is for the 2% of the firefighters that conduct themselves badly that reflects poorly on the rest of us. So if we can just wrangle those 2% in, I think we're going to be in a better environment for our women firefighters and our people, of color, of minorities.
Well said, John. And if I can just add my 2 cents too, I'd love to come back. Thank you so much. But first, I have to thank you, Bobby, and iWomen for that, because we couldn't do this without your help. I think if you don't do it just because it's the right thing to do, and we are a part of this amazing fire service, people of great integrity, but there are a few people out there that give us all a bad name, and if we can't learn and educate because it's the right thing to do, I'd say look into your wallet, because the cases that I would in 2010 to 2013 in federal and state level cases, they have paid out over $8.5 million in settlements. So that should be enough to get your attention right there. Bobby, I think you've got great ideas with the near miss reporting, and I think we need to challenge and reach out to the fallen firefighters to make this a part of their life safety initiatives with mental health.
That's a great idea. Dr. Beth?
Yes. I'm sorry, I got distracted. So, did you want me to comment on what Angie was saying, or just closing?
I just had a closing thought. That's fine.
Yeah. No, I think that this was a great discussion. I look forward to coming back. We really didn't get into the. I think that the discussion needs to continue because we need to go more in depth. There are some very real psychological issues that come out, and it affects the individual that's targeted as well as the people who witness it, and it affects how they get along with the rest of the department, how they get along with the community that they're helping, and then how well they feel that they can do the job. And I think that in the general sense, mental health and the mental health related to this topic of sexual harassment is important to continue addressing. And so I look forward to participating in more discussions.
Well, and I guarantee you, Beth, that we're going to have them, and I give you my word, based upon you all's availability, we'll schedule a follow-up to this conversation. We'll keep it going. Again, I offer the platforms of Fire Engineering, Fire Rescue, Firefighter Nation, FDIC. If you want to contribute and participate and help combat this horrible scourge, it's wide open. On a general closing note, on my behalf, I've always believed in the integrity and the character of the firefighter as being first and foremost. I think it's almost more important than what we do, is who we are and that contribution that we provide to society. And in the future, it may be just that. To what we do, it's so important. And the honor code that we have adopted that goes along with the West Point Honor Code, where we say we will not lie, cheat, or steal and tolerate others who do. I think we may need to amend that to say we will not lie, cheat, steal, or bully, or tolerate among us those who do, because this is a form of power. It's bullying at its very, very basest level. It's probably at the most disgusting level you could possibly imagine. As Beth has mentioned, that the psychological impact to the victim is immeasurable and just absolutely unacceptable at any level. And finally, if you think it's not happening in your organization, you're absolutely blind. Then just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And even if you don't have any female firefighters, there may be a culture within your organization that's discouraging them from wanting to become members of your organization. Maybe that's why you don't have them. Last time I checked, they're about 50% of the population, so you probably should have quite a few in your numbers. And they make outstanding firefighters. Some of the best firefighters I've known were female firefighters, and still are today. And so, on behalf of Fire Engineering and Fire Rescue and Firefighter Nation, and we're committed to combating abuse of any kind against firefighters and against citizens. Because if they're doing it in-house, they're doing it out-of-house. Ray Rice just about brought the NFL to a halt. So imagine how this affects your community when one of us are involved in it, especially one of us on one of us. I can find nothing more deplorable, and we will do everything we can to fight it. I'd like to thank Dr. Beth, and I apologize for not mentioning your fire service history. That was a gross oversight on my part. I apologize profusely. My dear friend Angie, thank you so much. I wish you tremendous success with iWomen. I hope to do much more with your organization into the future through FDIC and Fire Engineering and Fire Rescue and Firefighter Nation. To my dear friend John, thank you so much for your time today. To all of you out there who are listening, if you've got questions, I can get you in touch with Ange. I can get you in touch with Dr. Beth or John. We'll get you help if you need it. If you want to report it, we'll figure out a way to get that done for you if you don't feel comfortable coming forward on your own. But we'll beat this. Firefighters can defeat any obstacle. We'll beat this. It might take time, but we'll get it done. Thank you so much for joining with us today. We'll let you know when we're going to reschedule. And please, be careful out there.